All in God's time. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you. This
Yes. Well, welcome, everybody. I'm going to lead us in a prayer today. So let's breathe in and breathe out. Gracious and loving God, we're so grateful for your presence with us always and for your presence with us today as we gather together from all different traditions and ideas to read your word that is manifest in so many different ways and helps us perhaps better understand our country and what it means to be beloved community. So bless this time, bless our ideas, bless all of us here. And I ask a special prayer for our brother Bill Farnham, who this morning has some significant jaw surgery. So can't be with us today, but we definitely keep him in our prayers. And we know that you and your healing power are with him. We ask all this in Jesus' name, in God's name. Amen. My apologies. I get so like in your your rote thing. So my apologies.
No.
Of course, we're also mostly the universal Jesus, so that Buddha or anybody else, same spirit. All right,
Okay.
Rabbi.
Well, we continue in our exploration of sacred American documents. And while last week was an official sacred document, I guess you could call it Declaration of Independence official, this one would be semi-official. It's official because it's in the gateway of the United States for so many people. We'll talk more about that, Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty. But it's unofficial in that it's not a government decision. This is an individual, a woman who, from a Spartan family, a very interesting family here in the United States, who wrote this lovely, lovely poem. And we'll have more about it, I guess, as we read. So I think
Maybe just add one detail about this poem, that it was written, just FYI, it was written like right after the first restrictive immigration law had been passed in this country that was about Chinese immigrants. So this was all the West Coast. And so they were starting to deport Chinese people. And Emma Lazarus was very, thought this was terrible. And she wrote this poem partly as a protest against that, but also because they were needing to raise money for the Statue of Liberty. So she wrote this poem as a way of fundraising. Because the Statue of Liberty wasn't presented for another 10 years or so. And actually, this was not on the Statue of Liberty when it opened. It's just so you know a little bit of the background. So
I suggest that someone read the poem for us. As we're reading it, as we're listening to it, each of us kind of reach back to our own genealogy, our own family history. Nobody in this room has ancestors that go back more than 200-300 years, I'm guessing, but maybe we'll find out. And to talk with just a little bit, to think in ourselves as we read this poem, as we hear the poem, our reactions as people that who come from other people who have moved around the world. And then we'll share those reactions, and then we'll see a poetic. Well, I think first we'll hear the poetic reading of it after we. I think we'll read it here first, or read it to ourselves. How do you want to?
let's read it out loud.
Okay.
Always poems are good to read.
Okay. Great.
We get Barrett to sing for us again.
Well,
We get Barrett to sing it for us again.
could we do that?
But that would only be what's on the statue.
That's right.
I think this whole poem is on the Statue of Liberty. Actually.
No.
Oh, it's not.
It's just the
Not what I looked
being
up.
tired. And
Yeah,
Oh, just that part?
yeah.
I think that's the only part on the tablet.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. The rest of it might be inside somewhere.
Well, I think there's on
Yeah.
the pedestal. There's the
Yeah,
whole poem.
I think.
I think,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll read it today. So just for variety. So, would you like to read it though, Vera? Because you're our new Colossus. For those of you in Or Hamidbar, or as you may or may not know, Irving Berlin wrote a musical, put this poem to music. And it was quite popular in the 50s, 1950s and 60s.
1949.
Yeah, it was for a play called Lady Liberty or something like
Yeah.
that. Anyway, and Vera sang it for our offertory on Sunday.
Not like the blazoned giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name Mother of Exile. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your stored pomp, cries she, with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
So we're going to share, this is a video version of the poem that's animated, illustrated, that kind of gives us, I think, accentuated an understanding of the images that Emma Lazarus is creating here, the contrasts. So we'll look at this poem now, as we've heard it, and hear it as too, and then we can discuss it and kind of what pops up for us. Can you X out the side there, because we can't see it.
I think it may need to be done.
Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame. With conquering limbs astride from land to land,
We're going to put it on the single line choice.
here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame.
Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp,
Cries she with silent lips.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
Yeah, should we pair up?
Yeah.
With an old,
Of course, they can
Oh.
maybe be in a group or
no,
something.
that is too complicated. Let's go. So perhaps we don't need to go around the room, but people would like to speak, especially to the lines that stood out to them, what they mean, what they meant. Thinking also of your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents. But he'd like to, somebody tells me, that Dan, you know the poem well and you have some thoughts on it, but I can wait with you. We can wait a bit. Is there someone who knows the poem well who would like to start? You can?
Well,
Yeah,
I
please.
will comment
Please,
because
go ahead, give your name for everybody here, especially the folks at home.
I'm Vera Glur, and I had the privilege of going to Statue of Liberty and going over to Staten Island and looking up my ancestry's name in the book. So
And they
that
were
was
from
they were Germans from Russia. Yeah. So that was very exciting to be able to do that. And I definitely look at the poem as a source of welcoming all strangers and all immigrants into our country, and that this is the land of the free.
Want it the other way?
Your name?
I'm Grant Nugent. I'm a first generation American. My mother and aunt came to the United States as refugees from the pogrom in Romania at the turn of the century. And they came by way of Ellis Island. Fortunately, had a relative in Chicago that could take them in. And my mother used to tell me that when they came to the United States and got off the ship, they got down and kissed their hand. And to them, what was written on that statue was salvation.
One of the things that stood out for me, and my relatives all came from Germany, northern Germany, and during, I think it was to avoid the draft, what's his name, Bismarck's draft. I think there were a lot of Germans that came over the 1800s here because of that. Anyway, what really stood out to me, especially when looking at the animation, was the contrast to classic, like imperial European life. You know, the Colossus, you know, this idea of the giant Greek sculpture that'll be at an island, you know, kind of showing the power of Greek gods, and this cup of victory, and how she transforms it to this just a humble woman that's standing at the entrance with lightning in her, you know, it's caged lightning. It's much more powerful than the cup of victory, that imperial victory. And then your storied pomp when you see the Colossus or whatever it's called, Colosseum of Rome. Like, you can keep all your fancy European show off stuff. You know, we bring us your pool, all the stuff that you don't want anybody to see. Bring them to America, and that's where, you know, a welcome. So I thought that was a really powerful contrast that she makes in the poem.
You went at home. Go ahead. You can just unmute, Wanda.
I know I'm having trouble figuring out all these different screens here to get to the right one. On this, my family was, on my mother's side, was from Germany. My grandma was from Berlin. And on my father's side, Irish. But what really comes to mind for me when I heard this and listened to this last night is at the end, I don't know if any of you ever went to a Fred Waring and the Pennsylvanians show. And at the end of every concert, we sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And the words, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." And as I read that, I came back, because every night we would sing this. And I thought, I've got to get a hold of Jonathan, because it's such a beautiful, powerful song. And that came to mind, just being a part of being able to bring that song over and over again to people in America. And those words just are so powerful. So,
Wanda, are you talking about the song of the new the Bring Me Your Tiger, not the Battle Hymn of the Republic, or did they sing both songs?
no,
This isn't part of the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
it's part of Battle Hymn of the Republic, and it's
not
the
because
last.
the Battle Hymn of the Republic was written 20 years before this poem. So
Yes,
I'm
but this was rewritten. This was rewritten.
Oh, it was a redo.
It's a
Okay.
redo of this.
Got it.
And this was Roy Ringwald. It is just a
see.
phenomenal song. But no, yes, this was
I see what you mean.
rewritten.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Well, I I hate to put a downer on this stuff, but I went to Ellis Island, and I think the Statue of Liberty is absolutely beautiful, and what she stands for, but it didn't stand for my people. I've done my genealogy, and I can't even find my ancestors, and so it's all great for certain groups of people, but it does not include my people.
So, Randall, I want to thank you for bringing that up, and that's going to be our topic next week. Is what was for some people was not for other people.
Right.
But it's really important to mention that here as well. As a foundation story, or as a what did they call them in superheroes? What do you have the backstory of the superheroes?
Foundation, I don't know.
There's another
The
anyway.
prequel.
Whatever it is, it applies to so many white folks that live in this country, but it certainly doesn't apply to others. And Ellis Island was not the only way to get into this country, and other people got into this country not only in the painful memory of slave trade, but also people that found their way across the southern border over all these years.
Or Canada.
What's that?
Or Canada.
Or Canada. Yeah.
Wasn't there people coming on the West Coast too, like the Chinese and stuff, didn't they?
Yes, of course.
They immigrated.
Yeah.
I don't know, San Francisco or maybe.
San Luis Obispo has a statue to the Chinese railroad.
Yeah. That area was the oldest part of California.
So, and we'll get to that in just a moment with our next video. But just some more comments. Yes, please. What is your name?
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey.
So I've also been there, and my great-great-grandparents came to Ellis Island. And I know this poem really well, because I know the song really well, of course. What bugs me a little bit is how heroic and wonderful all that is, and how horrible it is today. It drives me nuts. I've been working for 6 years, and my sister-in-law just got her residency last week. And that's what it takes to, it's ridiculous. Thank God she did it.
Well, I think that's important to remember too. Even this poem was written because they were starting to deport Chinese that had come here and built the railroad and done other things. They were like, nope, too many Chinese. Out you go. So there was already sort of this ugly behavior.
But that's not what people think about when they look at the statue.
No. So it's important. That's why we have these classes. Yeah. It can feel really romanticized.
Dan, can I call on you now?
Yeah, I grew up, Son and I, my wife and I grew up just outside of New York, and we went to school in New York, and we took it for granted and actually never visited the statue in Ellis Island until maybe 10 years ago. And we took the opportunity of going through the museum, and they also had their thoughts about the museum there. They had people, docents would help you look through genealogy computers, and both of our families came through that area through New York at about the same time. My mother's parents around 1907, 1909. Sona's grandparents, some just before World War I, around 1911, 1912, and other after the Armenian genocide in the early 20s. And we found many of them in the registries on the plaques outside. And so it was, we waited a long time to go there, but it was a very moving thing for us to experience this, both on the Jewish and Armenian side. This poem does speak to us very strongly. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tom, and I've also been to Statue of Liberty, very moving. One branch of the family was Scots Irish, And so they've been coming over for, there's about a 150-year period where they came from the same part of Ireland. And they were really fleeing British oppression in a real way. The other side of the family, again, over several hundred years, came from the same village in England. And it was a very poor area. So they were fleeing economic oppression, if you will. And I think this poem really does speak to America's highest ideal in our best. This is what it is. And that door was open to my people the whole time. They were British, they were white. Makes me sick what's happening now.
Well, for me, this poem
Your
is
name is
very.
for everybody at home.
Oh,
Your name,
Ernie Stroman.
Ernie,
Yeah.
yes, so everybody.
Yeah, I was going to say that this poem is very aspirational for me. It was interesting listening to the conversation that you can all cite your heritage, but I cannot cite mine. And as Randall was saying, I would love to think that this poem is written for me, but it was not written for me. But it still gives me hope. Still gives me hope. Yeah.
I'd like to comment.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Ruth Pitts Littman. I agree with Ernie on that, how it is a moving piece. But I cannot say that it is about me nor my family. And but it is part of my life in a way.
Someone at home? Please.
Yes, I'm Charles Stebbins. I would like to comment. Well, first, I'm not sure when our family came here and where our roots are. But Vera mentioned looking at the list and finding ancestors. And I had the very moving experience of looking at the list of the people that were incarcerated at Manzanar to find my best friend and his family. And I noticed that the father was not there, and learned later that he was incarcerated in a federal prison in Texas because he would not say that when they were released, they would self-deport to Japan. He was an American citizen, and he was intent on staying. And we're seeing similar things today. So oftentimes there's people that are not spoken to in what our government actually does. This is lovely. It would be nice if it worked that way.
So I'll speak for myself in a different kind of approach. On one hand, I personally have never really been so interested in my family's genealogy. I'm not proud of it. And in Israel, all the kids in school, they have to do a project. And because Israel, everybody's parents or grandparents or certainly great grandparents are from some other place. And so they did a lot of the work, and I overheard it, I guess. And they interviewed my mother, less so my father. But it doesn't fascinate me because I feel that I'm more concerned with the here and now and going forward. It's not better or worse, and as I say, I'm not proud. But as an 18-year-old, I moved to another country. I moved to Israel, having grown up here in the San Fernando Valley. And this could be a poem for those that come, the Jews of the diaspora coming to the land of Israel. And that's very, very loaded right now, not just since October 7th, but for me, the last certainly decade since leaving Israel. And this welcoming, and I can't help it, but here, Emma Lazarus's Jewish background, I don't know what her Jewish education was like. As a woman in a not so progressive Judaism in the 19th century, I'm not sure how much Torah she learned. But I certainly hear the Jewish spirit of welcoming people back to the land of a diaspora. The and that helps me understand this in a different way. In Israel, people, whoever mentioned what who somebody mentioned about kissing the ground was, yeah. So that's very common.
Right.
Even today. Yeah, if somebody there, but certainly it was in the 50s and 60s, tons of pictures. I think maybe I did it in 1970 when I first went as a high school kid. But it's very much, it's based on 2,000 years of Judaism, Jewish literature of coming back to Islam. Here, this in particular, people that were not necessarily drawn to a place, but maybe running from another place. And to me, that's one of the things that I want to consider in this study. How much you were drawn to this place and how much you had no choice of moving to this place, or you had little choice. Yeah. So to me, it sounds very, very Jewish. My Jewish ears.
Yeah.
Surrounded by my Jewish beard.
All
Others. Shall we get a little bit of a historical background? Yeah.
I want to say one more thing before we watch our next video, that a little bit more history, and if you want to watch a great Ken Burns, and really early Ken Burns, he did an hour-long documentary on the Statue of Liberty, and it's really interesting. And one of the things that we may forget is that it was originally created. It was this Frenchman wanted to create this for the United States. Apart from the immigration issue, that was something that kind of got tacked on the Statue of Liberty. It was much more about what we talked about last week about the human rights and because France was hoping to create the same kind of democracy in that America had. They looked at America as the beacon of democracy, and that's the purpose of the original. Because there have been that horrible, the Bastille Day that we think is like, oh, freedom of France. Well, that was kind of a mob event where a lot of people lost their heads, literally. And then what happened next was Napoleon. Then it evolved into this dictatorship, imperial thing. And so after all that, France was like, we need a stable democracy. And so the Statue of Liberty was a offering for that. And then 20 years later or so, it became more of a beacon for. It took a long time for it to be built, to get here and assembled, but then it became a symbol of Ellis Island and the arrival of people from all over the world. So I think that's kind of interesting too, about that symbol. So,
Magdalena, if you would.
So we're going to look at a video now that provides us some kind of history of of immigration regulation in this country. And really the main first act of immigration regulation is several years after the Anti-Chinese Act. But this is, we're going to start, and we're going to learn a lot about America's background.
You know, for a solid 40 years, just one piece of legislation completely changed the answer to a really fundamental question: who gets to become an American? So let's dive into the 1924 Immigration Act and really see how it reshaped the entire nation.
Yeah, this quote it perfectly captures what this law was all about. I mean, before 1924, America's front door was, well, relatively open. But after, that door wasn't just closed, it was locked, bolted, and guarded by a brand new set of rules that were designed to meticulously pick and choose who could even get on that guest list.
Okay, so how on earth did this happen? I mean, a law this huge doesn't just appear out of thin air. The 1924 Act wasn't born in a vacuum. Nope. It was really the culmination of decades of rising anxiety, economic chaos, and, let's be honest, some very powerful and frankly pretty disturbing ideas that had really taken hold in American society.
To really get why this backlash happened, you've got to look at this massive demographic shift. See, for most of the 19th century, immigrants were coming mainly from places like Britain, Germany, Scandinavia, Northern and Western Europe. But then, right around the turn of the 20th century, a huge new wave started arriving from Southern and Eastern Europe. Think Italy, Poland, Greece.
These folks were often Catholic or Jewish, they spoke different languages, and this change, it just sparked this incredibly powerful nativist reaction. And that backlash? It has a name: nativism. It's this political idea that the native inhabitants, the people already here, need to be protected from immigrants. And the nativists, well, they argued that these new immigrants were a threat to American jobs, a threat to the culture, and that they just couldn't be assimilated. So you have this simmering nativist sentiment, and then three major events happen that just pour gasoline on the fire. First, World War I fuels this deep suspicion of all foreigners. Then, a post-war recession hits, and a lot of people start blaming immigrants for taking jobs. And then there was the most sinister influence of them all: eugenics.
Now, eugenics, it was this popular pseudoscience at the time, and it basically provided a supposedly scientific reason to be racist. Its proponents, and we're talking respected politicians and academics here, they argued that people from Southern and Eastern Europe were just genetically inferior, so they'd pushed for immigration restriction to stop what they called the dilution of the American gene pool. Just wild.
And you know, this kind of thinking had been getting baked into law for decades. The 1924 Act was really just the final blow in a long, long campaign. It started with targeting Chinese laborers way back in 1882, then they added literacy tests in 1917, and then the first actual numerical quotas in 1921. But for the people who wanted to restrict immigration, even that wasn't enough.
Okay, so that brings us to the law itself, the Johnson-Reed Act. Let's really break down the mechanics of this thing to see what made it so incredibly powerful and, well, so transformative. Right, so here's the crucial thing to understand. The people who wrote this law had a very, very specific goal. They wanted to socially engineer the nation's demographics. They literally wanted to freeze the ethnic makeup of the country, to turn back the clock to what it looked like decades earlier, before all those so-called new immigrants showed up. And here's exactly how they did it. They came up with this national origins quota system. But the real trick, the key to the whole thing, was the baseline they chose. They set the quota at 2% of the foreign-born population, but from the 1890 census. And that was no accident. They deliberately picked a year that was before the massive wave of immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe really took off.
And just look at the results. It was absolutely devastating. The annual quota for people from Italy dropped by 91%. For Greece, it was a staggering 97%. So you see, this wasn't just about reducing immigration overall. It was about radically re-engineering who was coming, heavily favoring countries like Britain and Germany, while basically slamming the door shut on everyone else.
But believe it or not, the quota system was only part of the story. The law also had this other incredibly powerful clause, and this one was aimed squarely at immigrants from Asia. It created a simple, brutal, and incredibly effective ban.
So who exactly was ineligible to citizenship? Well, the naturalization law back then was mostly limited to free white persons. And just before this act passed, a couple of Supreme Court cases had ruled that immigrants from Japan and India were not considered white and therefore couldn't become citizens. So by tying immigration directly to citizenship, the 1924 Act basically barred almost all Asians from entering the country. It was a legal backdoor to a total ban.
Okay, so we've been talking about the cold, hard text of the law. But now let's pivot and talk about the human impact, the profound consequences this had for real people, for families, and for the very fabric of the nation for the next 2 generations.
40 years. For 40 years, this one law shaped American life. I mean, really think about that. 40 years is such a long time for a nation's doors to be effectively shut to most of the world. It completely shaped who was born here, what families look like, and who was missing.
The impact was just immense. You had families kept apart for decades, sometimes forever. The cultural connection, that flow of life from home countries, was basically severed. And for the first time, really, the law created this concept of a large-scale illegal alien population, because people who could have previously just entered legally were now completely barred.
And let's be clear, this had life or death consequences. Just imagine for a second. You're a woman in Poland in the 1930s. Your fiancé is in America, but the waiting list to get into the tiny Polish quota is years and years long. And as Nazism starts to spread like a poison across Europe, that quota, that little number on a piece of paper in some government office, it becomes your death sentence. And that story played out for countless people who were desperate to flee persecution. So,
What finally brought this 40-year era to a close? Well, in a way, the same world that created the law eventually provided the very forces that would tear it down.
Yeah, after World War II, after fighting a whole war against a Nazi ideology that was built on racial purity, well, America's own race-based laws started to look deeply uncomfortable. Then, during the Cold War, the quota system became a source of international embarrassment. By 1952, you have President Truman openly calling it inhuman and un-American. Now, his veto was overridden at the time, but you could tell the tide was starting to turn. Finally, right at the height of the civil rights movement, the system just became completely indefensible. So in 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signs the law that finally gets rid of the national origins quota. But as he's signing it, he says something. He makes what has to be one of the biggest underestimations in presidential history.
Because, wow, was he wrong? The 1965 Act was absolutely revolutionary. By getting rid of those old quotas and instead prioritizing things like family reunification and skills, the law triggered a dramatic, seismic shift in where immigrants came from, away from Europe and towards Latin America and Asia. It's the law that created the diverse, multicultural America that we know today.
And that brings us right up to today. Because even though the Johnson-Reed Act is long gone, you could say its ghost still haunts our modern debates about immigration. The core questions it raised are in many ways just as relevant now as they were a century ago.
I mean, just listen closely, and you'll hear the echoes. The argument in the 1920s was that immigrants threaten American culture and take jobs, while today you hear modern concerns about assimilation and economic impact. The pushback then to select better immigrants based on race has been replaced by calls for merit-based systems. But that underlying impulse to try and socially engineer who gets to come here, it's strikingly similar.
Look, the 1924 Act was one generation's answer to that question. It was an answer rooted in fear and in pseudoscience, and it had consequences that rippled out for decades. And really, it's a powerful reminder that a full century later, we are still debating that exact same fundamental question.
Sobering.
Yeah.
Even if perhaps we knew different aspects of this, to have it all laid together in such an efficient way, at least pedagogically. I'm thinking not only of the United States right now, I'm thinking of other places in the world. I'm in France quite a bit, and I see same thing there. We see it in Germany, see it in Italy now, and it feels like it's more of a less of an American issue. It's a human, Homo sapien issue. I guess my question would be, if people would like to relate to the fact is, how does religion work against that tendency of human beings? How does it support it? Especially our religion. I'm not talking about others' religion right now. Our own flavors of Judaism and Christianity, or if there are other faiths, or Buddhism, or other faiths. Yes, please.
Brand Nugent again. As I mentioned, my mother and aunt came over. Some call it a diaspora, some call it a pogrom in Romania around the turn of the century. My grandfather, who had been a major in the Prussian cavalry, took extreme measures and care to make sure that my mother and aunt were not identified as the Jews they were, but as Lutherans. Otherwise, they probably, number one, may not have gotten into the country at all, and number two, faced the really vicious anti-Semitism of the 1920s.
You're at home and you'd like to speak, just unmute and speak up.
What struck me at first in time at the museum in Ellis Island, I don't know what's happened to the exhibit since then, but it was quite, I thought, frank with regard to the history of American immigration laws. And what struck me is how arbitrary it had been, how decentralized, how differently administered in different ports in the country. And bringing forward to modern days and the changes in the laws and the attitudes, that these changes, which last for decades, come from very often small, temporary electoral plurality. I can't say it, pluralities. And how ephemeral political changes can have such lasting societal changes. It's confounding.
Yeah, well, it also strikes me that the anti-Muslim immigration bans and that whole fervor against a whole type of people based on that characteristic is really familiar. You know, I see it in the United States, I see it in France, I see it in Germany, where you can exclude people just based on their faith. So they're somehow less than.
My guess is that it's culture. It's probably as much cultural as it is religious, because the Muslim culture is just very different. And what I'm thinking about is, you know, one of the hardest things in churches. And I mean, I've never been in a church that's had this. When you have when you share your space with another Christian church of a different culture, things get really ugly. Mm-hmm. And there's something about, you know, how Martin Luther King would say, like, the most racist time of the week is Sunday morning. There is something about our own culture and the familiarity of it and how we tend to cling to it. But we have the belief systems that are with it. You know, as much as we universal love and everything, there's still this part of us that just wants it to be the way we like and the way we've grown up and the way we think is important. And it's hard to really feel comfortable with people that do it a different way. You know, I mean, just being honest, you know, like it's just kind of the way as human beings. I don't know if it's something in our genetic, you know, like years and years of evolution or whatever, and you get just in our system, even you get so used to being around people that think and look and act the way you do, and our whole being just resonates with that. And it's hard to like move into a place where we're completely comfortable and feel safe where people do things so differently.
Is it that kind of what racism is?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm just saying it kind of gets stirred up so easily, you know, as much as we, you know, where we love everybody, but then it gets a little too close for comfort, and ugliness just starts. It's a total discipline to learn how to be bigger. That's what I'm saying. It's just like, I think part of us is just wired to be that way. I'm not justifying it at all. It's something that we need to work through, but it's tricky, I think. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, it's tricky. And the Muslim culture, you know, the Middle Eastern, I mean, I'm guessing if they were Muslims from Malaysia or someplace like that, you know, where it might not feel as scary. When you have Muslims from the Middle East, it's
like in France where they, you know, ban headscarves.
Oh yeah,
that's racist.
Oh, it's it is.
Trump saying cut off all immigration from all Muslim countries. Period.
Yeah, and it's total fear-based stuff.
Voigts complained about this kindergarten kids wearing hijabs to sing a song at their graduation. And he made vicious statements about these little kids.
I think, Eileen, you'd like to say something?
Well, I think I come at it maybe from a different, growing up in Chicago, you know, we've been exposed daily to different cultures, and I worked mostly in communities of color. And so I don't look at people differently. I just look at them as human. And so I don't feel that, you know, if somebody's going with a headscarf or with a yarmulke or whatever, that
they're really any different than me. I don't seem to feel that anxiety at all. I'm the video just showed me what we had has come back, and I think it's a very sad state of affairs. That happened in 1924 and affected us is happening again, that much later, and it's sad. So,
Pastor Jane, your comments resonated with me quite a bit because I was at Wilshire United Methodist during the period when we were trying to include everybody. The English-speaking part of the congregation, well, we go back up, there were three parts. There's Filipino, Korean, and English-speaking, mostly African-American English-speaking. And we tried, it was hell. But the interesting thing was we wanted to include them, but they didn't want to include us. And so it was kind of like an interesting turn of fate, that we went through. And I think eventually we just kind of gave up. Yeah, so, but anyway, but what you were saying, really resonated with me.
I just want to clarify that there are no such issues between United Methodist Church or Hamidbar. Possibly because we're Jewish.
That's right. If you or some other Christian sect.
Oh, no. No, the truth of the matter is you have hosted very often in my 10 years here other Christian congregations that I think we're in a different space. But other comments from home? Those that have, yes, please go ahead, Rosemary.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Rosemary Molinaro with my husband, Bob. And just listening to everyone here, there's something that really, really disturbs me, that to know that most of us in this room have history with Ellis Island and our families, our grandparents, but that Randall and Ruth and Ernie don't have that experience. And I've never really thought of it that way. When you think of the people who came to America, you think of the big picture. But when you know someone, like we know our friends here in this room that didn't have that experience. They can't go to Ellis Island and, look for their ancestors. And I never really thought of that. But hearing it from people I know, it's very disturbing. And when my granddaughter was in high school, there were kids that refused to say the Pledge of Allegiance because they said it is not liberty and justice for all. So it's still, when we say we don't learn from history, it's bound to repeat itself. It's still going on. It's still going on today. And it's just very sad. It's just very sad to know that not everybody could go to Ellis Island and see their families.
Yes, please. Don't have a name for you, I just.
Toinette, yeah.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute. I wanted to tack on to Rosemary because I've also felt like Randall spoke some about it last week and the three of them today. And we're studying these important documents that were in the development of our country that don't speak to them. And it would be interesting to hear from them. Are there documents or things that do speak to them regarding their history in America and regarding where they came from that maybe would be worth our time to look at also? Maybe not in this class, but at another time.
So in all fairness, that is our topic next week. Are exactly some of those texts. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. In my own religious dialogue that I only started after 9/11, that was my wake-up call to do that in my rabbinate. And I was in Qatar, in Doha, at this very, very plush hotel, and folks from all over the Muslim Christian world, and especially from the Middle East. And I was invited to give one of the papers. And I spoke about me going, moving to Israel, or what I call the Holy Land, when I was 18. And one of the Muslim clerics interrupted me, which wasn't done there so much. Why would you possibly move from the United States to Palestine? Why? What were you thinking? And it was because I had never actually framed it that way, because it was so given that that's what we do. It's so given that these are our texts. It's so given that white folks have dominated American society forever that it's really hard for us to get out of our. So we need to have these kinds of dialogues. Now, in your church, you do it on a week-to-week basis. You're part of the community. But we have a little bit in Or Hamidbar as well, but by and large, we're a bunch of white folks. Yeah, Jewish white folks who often whine and kvetch that they've been persecuted too much. That's difficult for me to hear that, especially compared to. But it's this idea of having this interchange in this way, people feeling comfortable to speak. I think that's an important part as well. So I hope people perhaps, yes, go ahead.
Charles, again, speaking of discrimination, for me and for a lot of us, that's never been a problem because I'm white. I have the label white. If I were stopped today by ICE and they added 2 questions, what is your religion and what is your sexual orientation? Then how do you respond?
Like, what are your politics?
It was mentioned earlier that they were characterized as Lutheran, so they could make it to safety. Well, if you're stopped not by your looks but by your label, then how do you answer those questions?
Do we have somebody who would like to read from Romans for us? We're on number 4, Paul's letter to the Romans. Someone at home like to read?
Sure, I'll read.
Oh,
okay. Go ahead.
You could go.
Okay, don't do it at once, both of you. So
Yeah,
Eileen, go ahead.
Eileen, you could go.
Oh, sure. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you wish to have no fear of the authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive its approval. For it is God's servant for your good. But if you do what is wrong, you should be afraid, for the authority does not bear the sword in vain. It is the servant of God to execute wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also because of conscience. For the same reason, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants, busy with this very thing. Pay to all what is due to them, taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due, respect to whom respect is due, honor to whom honor is due.
Thank you. I wanted to just give a little bit of background about why this is in here. I was looking around for United Methodist responses about immigration, and we'll look at after this the statement by the Board of Church and Society, which is part of the United Methodist Church. This quote is one that is, and it's arguable if actually Paul really wrote it, and there's a whole different understanding of really the purpose of it. But it's this quote that is oftentimes used. This was in an article by an organization called Juicy Ecumenicism, which is one of the organizations that became part of the Global Methodist Church. So this is the conservative Methodists that broke off and became their own denomination because they didn't want to welcome gays and blah, blah, blah. And this was an article about like godly borders and godly nations, and God puts boundaries around countries, and the government we're supposed to follow the government and the rules. And so, you know, the anti-immigration sentiment is not unholy. And so this is just, I just wanted to share that. And this is what a lot of conservative Christians that believe in these, you know, all of this is oftentimes the scripture that they will, if the government says that we're going to do this, then we got to follow the government, and because the government's wise and do what they tell you. So I just want, that's why this is here, and that is oftentimes an argument that's beyond the biblical argument about why we have what we have today and why it's not a bad thing.
I wonder what Martin Luther King would say about that one.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear his take on it. And I meant to do a little more research because I've done some research on this section before, and I think there's some, as I said, some controversy because sometimes in Paul's letters, even the original letters like Romans, later generations threw stuff in. And you do see in these later letters that are not Paul's this idea that, you know, and John Wesley would have said this is good because he really believed like discipleship, the kingdom of God, all of that has nothing, you know, don't get yourself caught up in politics. Don't get yourself, you know, because it's about God and discipleship and living a good life, regardless of what the political situation is. You know, that was kind of their thinking. And don't make waves, otherwise you'll all be persecuted and there won't be a church anymore. So that was the thinking behind this, but it's now got used for bad reasons.
And that's a segue into the last part of our study today, is to look at what are, let's call them denominations right now. I'm ordained as a conservative rabbi, which is the Rabbinical Assembly. And while I don't necessarily subscribe to everything that movement means and says, but as the same way I would imagine this church doesn't totally subscribe to everything that's in the Methodist. But why don't we go through a little bit? I don't know. I didn't really know how to shorten. So I just brought the whole thing because I didn't want to decide what
wordy documents.
Yeah, you know, they come from the same organizational culture. Yeah, a comment about culture versus religion, right? You know, I'm not sure this the religion dictates that you got to be so wordy. It's the culture, you know.
That's smart.
Yeah, resolutions, etc. So, should we read them out loud? Give it a try. He volunteered to begin. Rosemary?
All right, we're on, we call upon
Number
William.
5.
Number 5, okay. You shall not turn over to his master a slave. What?
This is number 5. What the Bible and the United Methodist Church say.
On the first bottom of the first page.
Well, that's 4.
That's 4.
No. Letters was 4.
Oh, you know what? Because there's some of you guys have a different version. Well, what got sent on the what got emailed to you, it doesn't include number 3. So for some of you it is number 4, and for some of you it's number 5.
Sorry, number 4.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Okay, so
sorry about that.
So which one am I reading?
What the Bible and the United Methodist Church say.
Oh. Okay.
Which is Church and Society Organization. You see that, Rosemary?
I see.
Yes,
we call upon the United Methodist Church, that one?
No, it says throughout the Bible, God's people are called to love migrants. It's right after the letter to the Romans scripture.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, I
That's
got
number
it.
4
See where it is?
on
Okay.
my
Yeah,
document.
I'm sorry. Yep, I got it. Okay, throughout the Bible, okay, throughout the Bible, God's people are called to love migrants. From Genesis to Revelations, we see that God desires that we help the most vulnerable in our midst, especially the sojourner. Leviticus issues a call to love the sojourners in our midst, treating them as if they were one of our citizens. Hebrews tell us that in opening our homes to guests, we may be entertaining angels without knowing it. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Jesus himself was a sojourner. Jesus begins his earthly life fleeing to Africa as a refugee in Egypt. Jesus says that to welcome the sojourner is to welcome him. The United Methodist Church states that at the center of Christian faithfulness to Scripture is the call we have been given to love and welcome the sojourner. We call upon all United Methodist churches to welcome newly arriving migrants in their communities, to love them as we do ourselves, to treat them as one of our native born, to see in them the presence of the incarnate Jesus, and to show hospitality to the migrants in our midst, believing that through their presence we are receiving the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
I think that I'm going to suggest that we discuss this paragraph, and we'll leave what people to do at home but in what ways does this paragraph turn our issue of today's study into a religious issue and from a theological aspect, even before we see what we're supposed to do about
it? It references Jesus directly.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing that just popped up for me was because we had two different versions, and people got really nervous about like, why is their version different than mine? Like what got screwed up? You know, like what's this world coming to? You know, we have two different, you can't find it. And I was just thinking like, this is the problem we have with different cultures. Like, why are they're doing it a little different than us? Like what's going to happen? Like, are we going to be safe? You know what I mean? There's this kind of a fear that shows up, and we're not all the same. And that really is the call, I think, you know, the call to love people and to be okay with difference. Okay, that's one thing that popped up for me.
So more about Jesus and Jesus being a refugee, or Jesus welcoming refugees, to our Christian friends here, how that plays out in your own minds and hearts.
I mean, going back to like the story of Lot, you know, this imperative to welcome the stranger, to be kind of a stranger. It's in the DNA of the New Testament and rooted in the New Testament. And it's foundational. I don't see how, I guess, fear for some people sort of overrides that.
Yeah, and I think too, and Rabbi David can speak to this, in the ancient world, in the ancient Semitic world, it was just very common to welcome straight. Like that's what you do. Like, and if you go to places in those areas now, you know, you almost don't want to get caught by somebody like, come on in, let me make you dinner. You know, like, and I got stuff to do, but you can't. You're there to be welcomed for a full, no matter who you are. You know, and that's just these rules about like, well, because it was such as David, what we talked about a little bit, it was such a migratory culture, you know, people moving around everywhere for different reasons, that it was just baked into your religious practice that because you're going to be needing to be welcomed by somebody, so you need to welcome them as well. It's just the bottom line.
And the same story that you referenced actually presents both sides of it. Lot brought this man, who he doesn't know is an angel, into his home, but it's the crowd, the mob that wants to rape him. That's which is kind of the epitome of not being a student.
Right.
And Abraham and Sarah are placed on a pedestal, so to speak, because they did welcome those three angels in that scene there, in the scene beforehand. Maybe one could say that Moses was welcome. Moses was a refugee from his first days, floating in the water and taken in. But if we bring it back to Jesus, though, there's that one story in one of the Gospels about him being brought as a baby to Egypt, right, to escape. I'll be honest with you, and I'm looking at this from the outside, feels a little bit manipulative. At the top of the second page, Jesus begins his earthly life fleeing to Africa as a refugee in Egypt. I think that's, I don't know if the word is gratuitous, maybe, I don't really know what word, but Africa, yes, it's true that Egypt is part of Africa, but that's not in the ancient Middle East there. That's not Africa, it's more the Middle East, but I understand the idea. Does Jesus also welcome in your mind, in your living with Jesus' life? Is Jesus a welcomer of refugees, or is it about something else?
I think it would, I mean, in the Gospels, it's more about the prejudice between the Samaritans and the Jews. That was very, you weren't supposed to, if you were a Jew, you weren't supposed to go to Samaritan lands, vice versa. There is the story of Jesus, well, the Good Samaritan, of course, which was a shock to the Jews to have to accept the help of a Samaritan. The Jewish person can't even say it's the Samaritan when Jesus says, who's the real neighbor? The person who gave aid, he can't even say the word because they were just so hated. And when Jesus goes to Canaan or goes into the Gentile land, the one real time that we have that story in Mark and Matthew where the Gentile woman comes and asks for help, he says, no, I'm here to help the people of Israel. And I'm here to feed the children, not the dogs. And that's, that is like a terrible racial slur. And then she responds back cleverly, like, well, the dogs also like the crumbs. And it kind of like snaps him back. And he's like, oh, yeah, you're right. Look at being a jerk. And, that kind of thing. But it wasn't so much refugees, but it definitely was prejudice. Tribal prejudice. This wasn't necessarily racial, but tribal. Yeah, I would say.
Could one say, perhaps in a very midrashic way, which is embellishing the story, the narrative, that the test of humanity was humanity, or in this case, the culture of the land of Israel, in accepting Jesus as a refugee? If Jesus is part of God and wandering here amongst us, this is just my rabbinic mind going on, could one not also say that that's the lesson? And accepting Jesus in that way, to accepting God, to accept in the form of a person, is part of accepting the stranger. I don't know. I leave it as a question mark.
And probably for at least the people, the well-heeled people reading the Gospels, the fact that Jesus is even Galilean makes him a stranger. Because the Galileans were the Hicks up in the North Country. They spoke funny. They practiced Torah differently. They were very suspect by the Jerusalemites.
Can anything good come out of Nazareth?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So he would have come as kind of very much another stranger from a strange land.
So what I like about what attracts me about this is, in reading this in this context, is that the authority that tells us that we are to accept a stranger is Jesus, and not a particular law. Yes, the law is mentioned in one point here, right? In Leviticus, I think there's a quote of Leviticus that's from the law, but most of it is narrative. That's an interesting comment as well about laws and narrative. We look to law so much and for looking for justice. And And it's kind of not working out for many of us these days, right? Because the Supreme Court, because of different enforcement, but perhaps the fix is not in the law, or not just in the law, but in the story.
Of course, the law here is a good law. We like this law.
Yes, but it's interesting. The bulk of the paragraph doesn't deal with law, it deals with narrative. So maybe we too need to deal more with narrative, with hearing the stories of others. Pastor Jane and I were at a small demonstration in thermal, right? Thermal, 2 weeks ago or last week, and they had lined up a bunch of young people. You know, I think one or two of them were there, but they gave their stories about, you know, father being taken away, and they gave them in Spanish and then in English, which is as it should be in those communities. It's just really, really important for us to hear those stories. In the Jewish Holocaust-centric Ashkenazic world that I come from, really sanctifies the stories of survivors. You know, Steven Spielberg's project of documentation. But it needs to be so many more stories. It needs to be the African American stories. It needs to be the Armenian stories. Different stories that we hear less. Anyway, perhaps stories and narratives opposed to law.
Well, and I wonder too, David, when I think about the tradition of Judaism, where it's the source of, like what I've learned anyway, the source of revelation in Jewish faith is the Torah, is the law. Like, not that that's bad, but the idea that through examination, exploration, the presence of God comes through those words and inspires us to live moral lives. And in Christianity, the revelation is Jesus. So Jesus is like the revelation. But I wonder how much it doesn't translate to move us into a universal place. It becomes, well, this is what the law is. I'm going to stop here with my cultural understanding of what this is. And it's just about me and my culture. And Jesus is just about me and my culture. Taking it to the next level to then expand beyond what's your comfort zone. Like, we need to, all of us, work on that. And that's what hearing stories and letting them really affect us, and not just, oh, that's a nice story, but that's not me, you know.
So for homework, all of us, Jews and Methodists and otherwise, we can look at so what are the mitzvahs? What are the laws? We call upon, to me, that's the legal part of this document. We're going to skip over that now. Dan, could I ask you to read 6 and 7 or 5 and 6, depending on the sheet you have?
I'm sorry, I don't have the text with me, so I have to pass on this.
Okay, all right, then. Another reader. Sandy, would you like to? I'll just read the text in Deuteronomy first in Hebrew so you hear it. Lo tazgir eved el adonav, asher yinatzel elecha me'im adonav. Imcha yoshev b'kirbacha, b'makom asher yivchar, b'achad sha'arecha, b'tov lo tonem. You shall not turn over to his master a slave who seeks refuge with you from his master. He shall live with you in any place he may choose among the settlements in your midst. Wherever he pleases, you must not ill-treat him. Sandy, if you could read the section from the Rabbinical Assembly. This is resolution. There are, I think, 8 resolutions over the last 20 years. There's a round of resolutions every year that are on the topic of immigration, migration, and I chose the one I think that read the best. It's not the latest, but this one I think addresses written a little bit differently. Sandy.
Whereas Torah teaches, you shall not turn over to his master a slave who seeks refuge with you from his master. He shall live with you in any place he may choose among the settlements in your midst. Wherever he pleases, you must not ill-treat him. And whereas Maimonides taught that this commandment is given to make us protect and defend those who seek our protection and not deliver them over to those from whom they have fled. It is not even enough to protect those who seek our protection, for you are under another obligation toward him. You must consider his interest, be it beneficent towards him, and not pain his heart by speech. Whereas Maimonides further taught that this law is imposed upon us in regard to all who seek refuge, regardless of their relative status in society. Whereas the American Jewish community knows both an enormous benefit that has accrued to us as a result of being accepted as immigrants and refugees in the United States, and also the grievous pain when Jews fleeing the Nazi Germany were refused entry to the United States and were returned to perish in the concentration camps and gas chambers. And whereas over 700,000 undocumented people who arrived in this country as minors have been given temporary relief under the Deferred Action of Childhood Arrivals, DACA, and President Trump has threatened to end DACA program during the campaign and since the election. Whereas President Trump has threatened to deport more than 3 million undocumented people with criminal convictions, while there are only approximately 820,000 undocumented people with criminal convictions, which brings us to the serious task that the Trump administration will deport people who were merely arrested but not convicted or who are suspected of having gang affiliations. Whereas this being about the separation of families, economic disruptions, and dislocations of the possibility of serious harm and death to those deported. And whereas both government and privately owned detention centers are already rife with civil rights violations and poor conditions. Therefore,
Okay, we'll leave the legal part of it, therefore, very important to look over, but the approach here is quite different. Approach is a typical legal approach. The conservative movement broke away from the reform movement. The reform movement began in the 1820s, Germany and Poland, other places, and it was filled with rabbis who, on one hand, had a background of Talmud study, but also had been admitted already to universities and began critical thinking. They came up with, that was the Reformation in Judaism, much later than in Christianity. At some point in the United States, things got out of control, where some of those rabbis that wanted to be modern and academic thinking, they felt that they were throwing out the baby with the bathwater, the Reform rabbis, by leaving the laws of kosher food and Sabbath and things like that. And so they became a conservative movement compared to the Reform Jews. Now, when people see me, for years I had a long ponytail. I said the last thing I look like is a conservative rabbi, right? I'm not little c conservative. So the conservative movement still thinks, though, in legal terms, that instead of every Jew deciding for themselves what they're going to do in practice, which was the Reform ideology, we will still have rabbis gather and look around at the world and combine science and political science, things like that, but also with Talmudic or rabbinic, Maimonides being a medieval rabbinic authority, continue to write halachic Jewish legal literature. This sounds very, very legal. It's all based on verses and rabbinic authorities and then the world around us. But the approach is very different here. This is not accepting the foreigner, not accepting the, this is accepting the refugee and placing it in a totally different point of view. And that worked for some rabbis. These things have to go through back and forth for people to, it's a political process for many of the conservative rabbis to accept this. It had to be placed in a different framework. We're helping those people, we're protecting their lives. And not just because we're welcoming a stranger. They're two different things. They're not, at least that's what I came out of reading this. And we have a few more minutes for some response. Sorry to be a little bit dominating there in the last part, but we're towards the end. And any questions or comments?
One thing that I keep thinking about and hopefully we'll hear more from politicians as we get closer to the midterms, but I just don't hear much coming from, like, what's the Democratic Party, for example, What are they good? What kind of laws or what kind of stuff are they really planning to do to counteract what's going on? Like, I just don't hear, I hear stuff about affordability and other kinds of things. But I wonder from our politicians, or we need to be asking them or calling them to respond to this, like, because this is terrible what's going on. And I just wonder if our politicians all think it's not, like, voters don't care enough about it. So we're just gonna really worry about the things that voters want, which is their money and their stuff. That's just something that I've been thinking about.
I also think for candidates to, the more they put out there, the more that's up for investigation and attack. And so if they're running on popularity, they're not gonna put more out there. They're gonna go with the sure bet.
Just really, as a church, I think it's up to us to call politicians to speak to this. Like, what are you gonna do about this?
Yep, I think so too.
Also, there's a narrative put out by the president and his party that Biden just opened up the border, that we were flooded with, all these, anyone who wanted to could come here.
And they're all criminals.
They're all
And they're terrible, like the worst of the worst.
And horrible things have happened to us as a result. And I don't see the Democrats offering a different scenario to come out and say that's not true. And offer a different narrative, right? Because if no one challenges that narrative, then everything that comes with it, people are like, well, yeah,
When Biden became president, remember DACA was being argued and we needed to end DACA. But those were children. Now we don't even hear about DACA much. It's just kind of like in the background. And I think part of that is because they were children.
One of the things that I'm hearing in Jewish circles is that when you bring up the fact, hello, look at all of us. We all come from another place, and not too long ago, we come from persecution. Often you hear, yes, but it needs to be done legally. And which is just belying a total misunderstanding of the world, of law and the policies here, because there is no way right now, especially there's no way to be a refugee. And the other thing that it's belying is the fact that,
unless you're from South America.
Yeah, but also how many of our families also came here illegally with forged documents, for instance. Tremendous amount. So honestly, going forward, listening to the other story, as I said, next week we'll be dealing with our main focus will be on a text, a well-known text from Frederick Douglass, and some other aspects of how color and racism plays into this 250th commemoration. But thank you all for being here. Thank you to the church for hosting this.
Thank you, Rabbi David.
Thank you, Rabbi David. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We'll see you all next week.
See you next week.
Right.
Okay.
Take care.
Next week we'll do our best to have everybody have the same handout. Life's hard enough. Happy